Okay, folks, and welcome to episode 6 of Talk Bigfoot with the IBRO. I'm your host, Chris. And if you cast your mind back to about 4 weeks ago, we had a gentleman on named Aidan McCartan. Aidan promised us and has kept his word that he's going to come back and talk more Bigfoot stuff. So he is back. And hello, Aidan.
Hi, Chris. How are you? I would come back every day and do this if you had time, Chris. Do you know what I mean?
I
It's a
know.
subject I love.
Yeah, definitely. That's what I say. Even with the previous guest there I was chatting with as well, and it was the same thing. We could have talked all night, but obviously we've all got our own lives and different
Well, that's
things
it.
and jobs to look after too. But it is one of those subjects that if you had the finances available, where you could just push everything aside and just go full time Bigfoot.
Definitely. That would be a dream, but I don't think I'm going to be employed in that way.
No,
That would be nice.
same here, unfortunately. But yeah, anyway, last time. I think we finished off last time, Ed, and you mentioned that you're going to chat a little bit more about the conspiracy end of things. So,
Well, there was a number of conspiracies about Bigfoot that well, you know, even before the internet was developed, which obviously is a hotbed of conspiracy theories. If you look in throughout the historical context of Bigfoot in North America, i.e., USA, Canada, and Russia, Bigfoot was, I believe, generally accepted as an entity up until around the 70s. Now, within the 70s, there was the backdrop of obviously the 60s, and the 60s opened up a lot of ecological, environmental awareness. And obviously, if you were to protect, and a number of animals were starting to be protected, and people were starting to understand what endangered species were. If if you cast, well, if you do some research on the internet, now if you were to protect a Bigfoot type creature with its huge habitat, you would obviously impact onto any big business that was operating in that area. Obviously, within Russia, you've got mining, you've got oil production, agriculture, very similar in Canada and the USA. Now, within the Russian one, there was an agency within the FSB that was effectively charged with hunting the Yeti in certain parts of Siberia and the Altiv. Also in the USA, the FBI are setting up a paranormal research laboratory to hunt creatures such as this. Now, so this wasn't effectively a conspiracy. This, I believe, was an accepted fact. And I believe Bigfoot went into the realms of folklore around this time due to
mm,
due to large corporations and industry not wanting any environmental protection or ecological habitat protection, which would impact in their businesses, which would then have, obviously, with the size of Bigfoot and the way Sasquatch, Yeti, all the different names within these industrialized nations, that would have an environmental impact if you protected his habitat, which was a very real concern at that time. So all, I feel, official paperwork, all the documentation was limited at that time. All
mm,
the studies across these three industrialized nations, this is where the conspiracy came from, was to put Bigfoot down as a myth. You had hundreds of years of history. Bigfoot's around long before the internet. People currently don't understand that. And if the American government or the Canadian government or the Russian government were to have accepted Bigfoot, the Sasquatch, the Yeti as a living, breathing, existing animal, they would have had to put down environmental protection, which
mm,
would therefore have had an impact on mining, agriculture, forestry, oil production, many, many different industries who have vested concerns in all the political institutions within these three countries. And that's where I believe the conspiracy and the sort of people, oh, well, he might exist and he might exist, when I believe it was pretty factual up until that time. I think there was
uh,
more written there in hard copy books, evidence. you look, serious expeditions, explorers from British, American, French, all hunting the Yeti, all hunting the Bigfoot. And I believe there was more proof and sightings at that time. It's just that we didn't have the internet to catalog them all.
Mm. And of course, Aidan, obviously, you know, as we go further back in time, if you can imagine all the cooperations and the big tycoons actually shrinking rather than growing. So if we reverse ourselves back in time, like you said, it was more talked about. It was more of a normal thing back then. Even here in the British Isles and parts of Europe, it was common knowledge of the woodwose in Europe as the
Of
as
course,
the
it was. If
the
you look back to
Wutawaza in Europe. You know, it was common knowledge. And most of the old churches and cathedrals have symbolism of the woodwose all over them.
that's very true. The woodwose. I read an article, and it was about King Konag in Norway. There was a family of woodwose operating in and around the Norwegian fjords and the forests, and they actually caught them and brought them to the king. And they were hairy, humanoid primate type beasts, mix of Neanderthal, mix of I think we discussed it last time, Almasti, and
Mm.
they were studied in court, and it was very well documented. And this is 700 years ago, so it's not that far in the grand scheme of things. You know, that was written and documented. Also, if you look at England, Ireland, the woodwose is heavily depicted in carvings, in literature, in symbolism. There was even coins with the woodwose on it, operated down around Devon, Exeter way, and in well, not just statues, but inscriptions and carvings on church walls. And that was your internet back then. People seen that, and people seen these animals, and the only way that they had to record them was through inscriptions and drawings and literature. Now, obviously, you've got the internet, you've got the digital age, but back then, it was so accepted. They ended up on walls across the UK, across Ireland, and across Northern Europe. Obviously, where the name woodwose came from, wild man.
And of course, even up to modern times, it's still obviously known in certain circles of people that aren't maybe into the Bigfoot subject, even because down south, if anybody of our listeners are aware of a little town called Trim in Ireland, only there in 2017, I think it was on St. Patrick's Day actually, that a new paper mache statue was created of the wild man of the woods, and it's now actually on display in Trim Town Hall, and it was paraded through the town on St. Patrick's Day, and it now resides in the town hall. So I mean, even besides the internet and besides the Bigfoot community, there is people there in Ireland who are still aware of the wild man of the woods and the history behind it.
Yeah, well, without doubt. I mean, Ireland is cloaked in mythology and folklore. Is there wild men or woodwoses living in the wood? Of course there is. I think everybody with a reasonable brain would accept that. And not only Trim, there's sightings up in the north, in and around the Mournes, in and around the Glens of Antrim. But for them to start, for the political entities in Trim to start accepting that, this is part of their culture, and this is part of the local heritage, and then to exemplify that through a structure which is now being kept in Trim. I think that's excellent.
Well, of course, Aidan, there is in some case. I know there's a lot of things going on, like you spoke about there with the large cooperations and stuff, and the large tycoons probably having something to say against it. You know, about letting it out from being a myth is because of the oil, because of logging rights.
That's definitely correct.
And all those sorts of things there, but. A lady I was speaking to, who's actually a member of the ABRO, Aidan, from the States, was actually telling me that they're actually in certain states in America now, the state governors, even local councils, county councils, all those sorts of organizations are actually now promoting it, and even some of the state parks. The state parks are now selling Bigfoot memorabilia, and they're actually telling people when they turn up at the park that there's Bigfoots here. If you want to see them, come to our park. So that is a bit of a U-turn.
I don't doubt that for a second. People are becoming more environmentally aware. Logging, mining, oil, it's starting to sort of had its day now. Other industries are taking place. If you look, especially in relation to solar, in relation to different fiber optics being used, we're not pulling them from the ground. Different levels of currency, more digital. The habitat, people now want to protect it. There's not just the massive Bigfoot community. I think you touched on it earlier. There's people, who are on the sidelines who are neither yes or no, but they're starting to accept that yes, there is these creatures operate in the woods, and that they do need some level of protection. And obviously, savvy businessmen are going, well, there's the aspect that they could exploit the Bigfoot community, not exploit the actual Bigfoots themselves, and asking people coming to the park to view them. It's good business, and if we can get their environment protected, that would be even better. But if you go back to the actual conspiracy, yes, they were denied in existence by government, but they were simply not talked about.
So of course, even in the States, and I think it's going back to the 70s. I think in the U.S. Army's handbook, I think it's pretty common knowledge amongst the Bigfoot community that Sasquatch was actually listed as a known species in the Pacific Northwest in their handbook.
That's correct. I wrote about that in the book. The elusive Bigfoot gets official recognition by the U.S. Army, and they wrote about him operating in the Washington states, and it was accepted that Bigfoot it wasn't accepted, it was a known fact amongst certain Army battalions who were operating in that area, and with the Canadian battalions as well, the Canadian Army, that they couldn't fire in certain areas and they couldn't have live operations due to Bigfoot activity. And I remember that in the Engineers World Atlas of Animals of America, I think it was called. Were they named? I think it's the Environmental Atlas for Washington, published by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, 1975. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers reported Bigfoot as being up to 12 foot tall, muscular build, and reddish brown hair. This was entered in a £200,000 Environmental Atlas for Washington, 1975. And in Washington State, there are statutes where it's also illegal to kill a Bigfoot off the back of that. That was 1975, and that was by the Army, who were still a bit behind the times in relation to environmental awareness and the impact that big business was having in trying to silence people within the discussion of Bigfoot.
And of course, one of the most famous people in North America to have actually come out and said that they seen a Bigfoot was Mr. Theodore Roosevelt himself.
I remember that. Yes, do you know what I mean? That's very true. Our ex-president, in his 1892 book, The Wilderness Hunter, he discussed Bigfoot attacking two campers in a camp. I did read this. I thought it was pretty cool. I think it was called the Bowman Incident or Bowman Incident. He reported, but there you go again. Though Theodore Roosevelt was a hunter, this was within the political and scientific community, or especially around that's the turn of the century, where people were expanding and more people were coming to America. They were having more and more of an impact on Bigfoot's natural environment, so they were seeing more of them at that time. And for the former president to write that in the book, nobody blinked an eye. Because it was generally accepted. People who were prospecting for gold, silver, iron ore were encountering Bigfoots so many times they started to take weapons with them, higher powered weapons that they didn't need to protect themselves from humans, that they were using effectively against the Bigfoot community. I did like that.
Of course, too, if we go even further back in history, I mean, the Spanish recorded when they were sailing past the coast of California. Going back to the 1400s, where they reported seeing large, tall, dark figures watching them from the forest on the shore while they went past in their ships.
Shiny eyes. I can remember that one as well. That were they were huge, and they couldn't understand what they were.
Mm-hmm.
Astonishing that they had large distant eyes, and her, all of them. Well, if you go back even further in time, there's Alexander the Great. He fought a battalion of Bigfoots. I'll try and get I did write it down, and I shared it on one of the sites.
Mm-hmm.
They, I think it was in Persia, were unloading a ship, and basically a squad of Bigfoots come out and attack them with rocks and with spears. So they were using tools, and they were huge. But what Alexander the Great done, he parked his ships, and they went round the back of them and ended up capturing them. So these were Yetis.
Right.
I can't find it now. But what had happened, they were sailing past. They'd stopped to reload, knew some items on the beach. The Yeti population came out, killed the people that were on the beach. Alexander the Great seen them, described them. So it got all around Europe that these Yeti creatures did exist, that they were around 8 foot tall, with grey skin, large muscular builds, hair all over them, no clothes, and they used rocks and weapons and communicated with each other through grunts.
Uh-huh.
I can tell you now that wasn't primates, that was Bigfoots.
Yeah, of course, the buggers are still using rocks to throw at us guys.
Yeah, that's it.
You know, but there was another one that I call on Aidan. I'm not sure whether you know anything about it now, but long before the Spanish made their way to North America, or to even South America for that matter, the Vikings made their way across the North Atlantic, and they tried to land in Newfoundland, I think it was, and were greeted on the beach by 10-foot tall black hairy men, as they described them.
Excellent. Do you know that? Well, the Spanish would have encountered everything, and the Spanish, they recorded everything. They had literature, they had words, they had written word at that point. So they're writing what they're seeing. They're not creating that through another image. Something's not stamped in their psyche where they've seen this before. This is all new to them.
Mm-hmm.
So they're seeing effectively a Sasquatch and writing down exactly what a Sasquatch is, and it's the misinterpretation throughout the centuries. Well, I don't think it is misinterpretation. I think that people were accepting that these colonies or societies, or I think you mentioned last time, clans of Bigfoot operating within large geographical areas, especially off the coast of California, were in existence.
Yeah.
There's other points.
There's actually 2 places in the world where the Vikings sort of went there and turned back, and one of them was Newfoundland because of what they seen with the Bigfoots, and the other place was Dublin because of the Irish.
I believe that. I bet you there's a bloodline of Woodwishes that dates right back to that incident.
There could well be.
There could well be. But if you look from the conspiracy perspective in Russia, there's a massive case that the Dyatlov Pass incident. It's probably one of the more famous or infamous cases of encounters, Bigfoot encounters, where a number of hikers went into the Ural Mountains and didn't come back.
That there, obviously, that story there, Aidan, is the UFO community would jump on that story because they would argue that was aliens, but I think the majority of people who know about that incident will definitely believe that it was Almasty who done the damage. Done the damage. Yeah.
Now, a lot of people are basing that the paranormal or the alien one off a number of films and off a number of I think incorrect reports. Now, at the time, obviously, the Dyatlov Pass. It was the event where 9 Russian hikers died in the northern Ural Mountains on the 1st and 2nd of February 1959 in uncertain circumstances. But they were operating in 0 temperatures, and they were all professional hikers. I think one of them was obviously a member of the KGB. That's it. But they were all well-educated, young, fit athletes. Now, they broke out from inside of their tents for no reason. For no reason that can be fully explained. Now, the group's bodies were discovered by Saudi authorities, and 6 had died from hypothermia, while 3 of them had died from physical trauma, and a number of them had fractured skulls and parts of their body missing. There's numerous theories have been put forward to account for the deaths. Animal attacks.
It was a very, very disturbing story, like whatever the case was.
It is, but if you look at the documentation around the Ural Pass incident, the Lyatov incident, there was actually a team of Spetsnaz sent out around that area to hunt for a Yeti. It's all documented. This isn't like internet fiction, or this was in a number of documentaries concerning the incident, and it hasn't been denied by the Russian government. Now, what I thought had happened was that the hikers were being effectively herded, effectively stalked by a Yeti or an Almasty in that area, and that they started to become worried and they camped down. I think that they cut the holes in the tent to try and keep an eye out. Right, so obviously to keep watch. You're looking out to see if the Almasty was still circling. Now, what we're starting to understand now about Bigfoot activity, are you aware of the infrasound roar?
Definitely aware that Bigfoot's use infrasound, yeah, because it's happened to me 3 times.
Well, and that's a theory that was put forward. Why would these 9 fit, intelligent, well-educated hikers rip through their tent and run? So they could have tackled a group of men, and I very much doubt that a Spetsnaz team would interfere with people from the local university. Now, what I believe happened is that they were disorientated through through the Yeti's infrasound roar, which obviously makes you sweat, dilate, and it increases your fear and confuses you. So after that happened, once one person does it, you have a mob mentality, and they're everywhere, and then you're dealing with probably what I feel is one of the biggest apex predators in the world at present.
And of course, infrasound is nothing strange. It's common knowledge that tigers actually use it. So I mean, it's nothing supernatural or paranormal. It's just an ability that they have. As probably a main objective for it is to disable their prey. But I mean, it's obviously used for people who come into the wrong area where they don't want a certain person there. Well, then they would use it.
Yeah, well, that's it. It's referred to as a low frequency sound, and it disorientates people. And as you say, tigers use it. There's possibly a number of animals, a number of predators that do use it, and it's to increase fear and it's to cause confusion, and it's used effectively as a tool for hunting. So, Buddha has the Bigfoot community, the Yeti, Almasty, the Sasquatch, the skunk ape. Have they developed? Of course they have. Do you know what I mean? They're large primates. They're predators. They've seen somebody in their territory. I believe they'd be quite territorial up around Dyatlov. I don't think there's been many people up around that way. They've seen them as coming in, interfering, and scared them away. But by scaring them away up in them mountains, it didn't work out that well, and unfortunately, a number of people died. That's what I feel happened. I believe that they encountered effectively the Yeti, Almasty, the Maitai in that area. And why then, at the same time, tell me this, Chris, why was there a Spetsnaz team out hunting for the Yeti in that area at the exact same time?
Well, they obviously knew roughly where it was, So I mean, and the rest of the guys were just there at the wrong place at the wrong time,
That's exactly it, and it does happen. All the locals said it was a Maitai. People want to blame, the indigenous people of the area because it's an easy fix. Well, they don't like people up there, but there was no sign that anybody else had anything to do with this. When the Russian military found them, that they couldn't explain anything that happened. And I think the conclusion was, listen, we don't know. We think an unknown compelling force did this, or a natural compelling force. I can't remember the exact word. That's a way of saying, so we can't really admit there's a Yeti up around there, or the Almasty, or the Muay but we're not going to deny it.
It's funny too. It's funny how it works too, because like I said, I've experienced it 3 times now. 2 times was extreme, right? And the third time was only last week, along with Jim Bradley. Now it was a mild version. We just sort of got headaches and felt confused. But the other 2 times, well, but even besides that, the 3 times that it's happened to me, the other 2 times were more extreme. I was sweating, sweating profusely, heart racing, and very confused. Both those times that happened was in areas that I never squatching, rarely squatching. And I'm going to actually thank my local squatches here now, because personally, if I don't know, they probably can't hear what we're talking about, but I mean, I'm going to thank them here anyway, because in my local area, it's never happened in. All they do is, whistle at me and do all these different things, because I'm probably there, because I'm probably there 2 or 3 times a week, So they obviously, it's obviously a thing. If they're not sure who you are, or they don't like who you are, or they think, well, this person's not here before, they could be a danger, well, then they would use it. But obviously, it's not a thing that they would use all the time, because obviously that is proof in the pudding that it's never happened to me in my local area. So, I mean, it's not a thing that they would do on purpose.
Yeah, no, I understand it, but what you're almost describing word for word there is a tool used by the Florida skunk ape, almost identical. Like they use a pungent smell, not the infrasound word, but disorientation, confusion, sweating, so short-term memory loss. People who hunt in the area of the Florida Everglades who encounter the skunk ape, almost word for word, Chris, it's unreal. So it's like you're reading a report of the skunk ape. So, and that's it's fascinating. So, but if you've heard vocalizations of Bigfoot, which you obviously have, the infrasound roar, now it probably doesn't come across as well in a recording. But if you're out in the woods at night and you're ready, a bit heightened, absolutely terrifying.
Well, folks, we've just came to about the halfway point of the show here, and last time round, Aidan did mention he was going to spoke about conspiracies. We did mention that we're going to speak about some of the encounters here in Ireland, and to get Aidan's point of view on that. And of course, we're going to do that now. Yeah, so Aidan, on to the encounters here in Ireland. I know you've got a wide knowledge of Bigfoot activity right across the world, but I know a lot of folks that follow the ABRO follow encounters and sightings and happenings here on the Emerald Isle itself. So one of the encounters that I'd love to hear your thoughts on, Aidan, is, well, first of all, the one in my local area, which actually intrigued me. It was Bracky Bog, and the witness had been walking up the trail. Actually, the trail that he was on is one of the probably least used trails in the area, and he was walking up there minding his own business, and he heard what he thought was an animal being killed. So he thought really nothing of it. It did disturb him a little bit, but he walked up the trail and came to the corner where the trail splits off to the right, and he felt the presence of being watched at that point.
Infrasound, possibly, or
and he turned. He felt the presence of being watched, and literally as soon as he felt that, he turned around, and there was a 8-foot tall Bigfoot standing directly behind him, literally 5 feet from him. So, before I get your view on it, the Bigfoot in my view, right? That time that happened in August 2017, right? And I know the area pretty well, as you know, Ian. So that time of year, the nettles are like 6 to 7 foot tall, right? And they actually go right along the trails on both sides of the trails that time of year. So this Bigfoot was obviously down behind those nettles preparing dinner, and in my thoughts, it's maybe said, well, this guy isn't getting none of my dinner, so I'm going to have to show him who's boss. That's my take from it. And of course, the witness wanted to make a bit of distance between himself and the creature, so he reversed and walked up the trail away from it and kept obviously looking back. It was still there, and it remained there for about 2 or 3 minutes up the trail. It
Not
remained
possibly.
there.
Do you know if he walked back quickly or was he slow? Do you know what
He,
speed he left at?
he edged off, pretty easy. He didn't want to, he edged off pretty easy, and obviously kept looking behind him. You know what I mean? And it was still there.
Quick turns or slow or like glances? What I mean is, was he at speed getting away? Something where it would be actually seen as a threat or seen as
No, no, he just sort of backed off, gently, and
okay.
obviously kept his eye on it. But eventually you have to look where you're walking to. So I mean, you
Of
have to look
course, of course.
forward at some point, and eventually, when he looked forward, he looked back again. It was gone. But
The
this is
natural
like,
reaction would be to run there, Chris. Do you know what I mean? So, but the sensible reaction would be to walk away in a calm, well, in a calm and non-threatening manner, without quick glances or quick sharp turns to catch the eye and possibly confuse the Bigfoot that was in the area. I think that's you could be quite correct in the assumption that Bigfoot had had a kill and was previously occupied. Now you're saying that I think it's is that a moss bog? I think we discussed before.
it is, yeah, yeah, yeah. And the water obviously can be really, really high in it, but usually, obviously, if we have a pretty good summer that time of year, the water is pretty low. The water's still there, but pretty low compared to winter time.
So, is there a lot of animals in that area that Bigfoot could feed off?
Oh yeah, there's no
There you
big
go.
animals now. There's no deer or nothing like that because obviously deer don't like bogland anyway. But
No, because
there is foxes and hares and badgers and rabbits and things like that. And there's I
well,
mean there's millions of frogs and fish and newts and all those sorts of things.
there's an abundance of food, so it would be. Well, Bigfoot obviously has he stumbled across Bigfoot in the area, who effectively was having his dinner. I appreciate it would be incredibly scary, but he's felt being watched there, which I think is a superb way of describing that. You
Mm.
know, when do you feel good? We all live in cities or we're surrounded by. We don't feel we're being watched. We're walking around, but if you're in the presence of a Bigfoot, you do. You can
Hmm.
feel it. That could be the heightened sense of awareness, the heightened sense of tension. That could be, as you described earlier. I agree. It's not just infrasound that the Bigfoot uses. It's uh, when you're there's nothing in the area, and then your hair stand up in your arm, or you start sweating a bit, or your mouth becomes dry in an area such as that. That could be one of the Bigfoot defense mechanisms to
Hmm.
try and keep you away, which explains a lot of misinterpreted encounters. Although I don't think that is what this is misinterpreted. I think he stumbled across it and he got quite closer, a lot closer than most people get. And instead of running or a fast reaction, he's walked away slowly and cautiously and hasn't attracted more attention, where the encounter could have been something a bit different. So
Of course, this happened. This happened during the day too, Aidan, and it happened right on the edge of the moss or the bog. Now, for the American folks listening there, before we go any further, a bog is a swamp. Basically, it's an air swamp. So this actually happened right on the edge of the bog, Aidan, beside the
well,
beside the field. So my guess is it was a watcher during the day, and the watcher obviously decided to have lunch at the same time, and this guy just got on the road.
possibly. I mean, you've just described there in America in terms of the bog is a swamp, and if you look at the skunk ape who operates in the Florida swamps, he uses a very similar tactic or technique to deflect people away from him, which is his pungent smell, which gives people the same sort of impression. Not that they're being watched, but they feel a bit nauseous and confused as they approach him, so they naturally move the other way. Now, he could have been a watcher as members of his clan or his community fed in the area, and he was distracted with his kill and wasn't doing his job correctly, watched him leave, and then possibly retreated back.
Well,
I think
he obviously definitely wasn't doing his job right because
no, definitely not.
he definitely wasn't. I think he was a watcher, right? He's supposed to be at that spot watching for people coming, and he's obviously had a little rabbit or whatever it was came into the site, and he's been too busy, making dinner than doing his job.
Yeah, well, although it's a brilliant encounter, I mean, I'd say it would be frightening, but it would be excellent to encounter something like that, to come across a Bigfoot in the middle of his kill, although he's obviously distracted. Well, I'm glad it didn't end in worse terms, but it's an incredibly interesting one. That's the so Bally Braca
Braga Bog.
Bragabog, Moss Bog
Mm-hmm.
Armagh.
Mm-hmm. North Armagh.
Yeah, I can remember hearing about that one.
Another one that
most of these sightings aren't reported. People don't tell you about them.
uh-huh.
It's incredibly underreported or misreported, or people not understanding what they're encountering. There's been myths and folklore around Ireland for millennia. Well, my granny and granddad, they're all from the country in and around Castlewellan, another popular site for encountering the woodbush or Bigfoot type creatures, especially that forest park. And what my granny used to tell me was, don't be getting in there. There's a big hairy beast that'll get you. That's why I was 4 or 5, do you know what I mean? And I used to think as I get older that it was just a way of keeping you out of the woods to prevent you from being lost and stuff like that. And then when you start to understand, if you walk around that Castlewellan Forest Park, there's pictures of the woodbush everywhere. I mean, everywhere.
Yeah.
There's carvings etched in the trees, part of the castle, and people are openly discussing large type beasts operating in the area for years. What is my 43? So at least for the last 100 years, if you're taking my granny's lifetime into account as well, that there's something.
Of course, in there, you're a Castlewellan man in there, as you've said, and one of the recreations that we have chosen for the new documentary, The Woodbush, is a sighting that happened at Castlewellan.
Excellent, excellent.
So I'm sure you'll enjoy seeing that one. As a guy who was driving along in his car, minding his own business. It was late at night, obviously. And the next thing, 4 foot tall juvenile woodbush made its way across the road in front of him. And it was clearly a Bigfoot. It was just a juvenile, obviously. But that happened just around the back end of Castlewellan Forest Park, I think.
Brilliant. I know this place like back of my hand. There's been encounters there for years of I always refer to them as the wild men or Bigfoots. The woodbush is a cracking example. But within, if you actually, well, you've obviously been in the area. If you take a walk around, I was there a few weeks back, visiting family, and I was clocking things. But I stayed on the trails. Obviously, the woodbush should stay off the trails, but that they've sort of publicising it now. It's pretty similar to what you said earlier in relation to the American Forestry Commission saying, come here and see the Bigfoots. They're sort of saying, without saying, come here and see the woodbush, all these wildman images all dotted throughout the forest park.
There's actually a guy, Aidan, who I know from Castle. I know him very well, and you may know him. I'm not going to mention his name on here, just for his own privacy, but you probably would know him maybe if I mentioned his name, but I know him pretty well, and he would work alongside me from time to time. Would take a run in with the job that we both do, and I think it was about last November maybe or so. We were in a local hotel between Castlewellan and Newcastle there, and I got chatting to him about it, because this guy had seen a big cat in the area as well, a black panther.
I've heard these reports before, yeah.
Of course, that's a different subject, but
yes,
I says, well, have you ever thought about Bigfoot or the woodbush? And he says, oh, catch yourself on, Chris, the way they get on over here, And I says, well, look at this photograph here. And I showed him a photograph of a major structure that was found in Castlewellan Forest Park. And he says, what's that? And I says, well, what would you take from that? It was a huge bend, Aidan, right? And it was right in the middle of the forest. I mean, not unless you can teleport a digger in there to do this. It's the only way it could happen, you know. A huge bend, a whole entire tree was bent over and pushed into the ground, and all wedged down on the other side with big logs and you name it. And I
Well, there
says,
is
"What?
no other explanation. There is
No,
no other.
that's it." So I said to the guy, I says, "Listen, how else could you explain that there?" I says, "Now, before you give me an answer, I want you to look at the area, right? Look at the area. There's no trails, there's no roads, there's no access for machinery to get in there. And the size of that tree, the tree was 70, 80 foot tall. And do you think a person could do that?" And he sort of paused for a little bit. And then he looks at me and says, "You know something, Chris, there could be something in that." And do you see,
Could be something.
literally, this guy is a avid jogger. He's a bit of a fitness fanatic.
Right.
And he runs up and down the Mourne Mountains, left, right, and centre. He runs around Castlewellan, around the hills around there.
Yeah.
And a week later, he emailed me and he says, "Chris, look what I found." And he sent me a photograph of another huge bend. Now, I don't think it was in Castlewellan Forest Park, but it was in one of the forests nearby. And up over the moor somewhere. I didn't ask him exactly where. But I says, "Well, there you go." And he says, "Well, there you go." He says, "I'll keep an eye out for you, and if I see anything else, I'll let you know." So I think I maybe created a new squatcher in your hometown.
Well, you've definitely. But that's where Kilcoo. It's just right next to Castlewellan. It's a mile down the road. Castlewellan's more of a town, where Kilcoo's more of a village. I'm actually from Andersonstown in Belfast, but the family's historically from there, and that's where, when I'm in Ireland, I go back to. Now, if you go around that area, it's you see these bizarre teepee-shaped structures everywhere. If you go into the forest with a bit of depth off the trails, just as you're saying, and there's also what can only be described as, large axes, but as you're saying, huge trees, where they're effectively, the trunks are bigger than my waist. Do you know what I mean? And they've been put. And I tell you what, there's no kids, there's no humans doing that, there's no machinery doing that. So what is actually doing it?
Personally, obviously, I bet you know what we think about it, but people have even often asked me, "And how exactly do they do it?" Because even one Bigfoot couldn't do that. Well, I personally think that maybe a group of them, 4 or 5 of them, climb up the tree, weigh it down that way, climb on top of the tree, and they'll actually weigh the tree down. And maybe the rest of their mates are at the bottom of the tree. "Right, guys, get this, grab it," and they push it in, and then push it in, and push it in, and then they've everything all around it there, and they push it in too. Maybe it's a show of strength thing. I don't know what it is, but
territorial thing. We've got the strongest clan. Look at the size of the tree that we can put down. Not that uncommon in the animal world. A lot of animals do similar things. Degree of intelligence to obviously build the structure. Well, it is a structure. The axes that are along the forest park, that's a bit more intricate, and shows you the strength of them. They actually bend the tree. Come on, do you know what I mean? It's an incredible feat of strength. So I think your theory was probably actually the correct theory, that there is a team of them working in unison, right? We're a clan. We don't want X or Y's clan in this area, so we're going to show them what we're capable of.
And of course, even some of the smaller, well, when I say smaller bands, I mean smaller than that one maybe, but clearly they do that singular by themselves, because there is bands that I have found which a human couldn't do, but certainly one Bigfoot could.
Yes, definitely. Do you know what I mean? I've seen small branches broken where, I've no possibility of them. Say branches that as thick as my arm. So you're just not breaking them, but I've seen loads of them all broken up and stacked together. Do you know what I mean? And not with saws, just snapped.
Snapped, yeah.
And it's like, wow. Do you know what I mean? It's what actually has done this. And when you're explaining it to the people around you, they're like, well, there definitely is something in this. There's something out here that's, it's too frequent for there not to be something there. And the large X-type structures, which I think we're quite famous for in Ireland, from the Woodbush and Bigfoot community, which there's no other explanation. Humans aren't doing them, as you say. Nobody's going to transport industrial machinery into the forest without leaving any tracks. It's just bizarre. So there is effectively, to use upon, something in the woods that's doing this.
Of course, like you mentioned briefly there about your grandmother, saying the tales, oh, don't go into the forest or the hairy man will get you. Like, those sorts of stories there in Ireland, we got them here too in my local area as well. We got those sort of stories too. We're going in the boogeyman will get you, or the hairy man, or all those different things. But it's not that they actually had an experience themselves, or even that their mother or father had an experience. But those sorts of expressions are coming back, probably, or going back generations to maybe somebody who did have an encounter.
Definitely. I mean, they're going back to an original source, like most folklore, most mythology. It all starts somewhere concrete, and as it gets developed, and as it gets, word of mouth, and as it gets, effectively, different, I was going to say Chinese whispers. I mean, things get added on to and taken away. But there is an original source for these, and it is somebody has went into the woods, and it is somebody stumbled onto a Bigfoot, and it's either scared them or they haven't come back, and that's why people are saying, "Don't go into the woods. There's a big bad man in there, and he's going to get you."
Mm-hmm.
That's came from an original source, and the people directly saying it aren't saying it through their own personal knowledge, but it has been created. Because things don't just start.
Yeah.
It's started by someone who's had an encounter.
And of course, Ian, one of the, before we're getting near close to the hour already, believe it or not. But one of the other encounters which I want to ask you about, which was probably wasn't amusing to the people at the time, but when you look at it, there is a bit of an amusing look at it. It was up in County Antrim. It was a Ballybully forest where a couple had been walking the dogs through the forest, and I think they heard a bit of movement or whatever it was. First of all, this is probably I don't know whether you could class this as one of the more uh, encounters that you would class as maybe a bit humorous or whatever. Maybe it was a young Bigfoot. I don't know what the situation was with the Bigfoot itself, but certainly to me, it seemed a bit childish, almost. So what happened basically was the couple were walking through the woods. They heard a bit of rustling about, and the husband went over to investigate what was going over, what was happening over at this bush. So he headed over towards this bush, and as soon as he got over there, this Bigfoot stood up. He said it was really skinny. They both seen it. Him and the wife both seen it. It was really skinny, right? And it had a look sort of between a Neanderthal and a chimp once again, which is the typical woodbush description. Yeah. But it sort of grunted at them a little bit, they got there, and it shook his head, and it had a big stick in his hand, right? So it sort of shook his head a wee bit and grunted and banged the stick off the tree, and then it ran off in a huff. That sort of that indicates, it was 7 feet tall, but it indicates to me it was pretty young, pretty immature. It was sort of a little bit peeved off that these two had maybe annoyed his happiness, and it shook his head and banged the stick and ran.
Brilliant descriptions. I mean, they've got a real good view there. So this family, it's a cracking encounter. But they've obviously interrupted possibly a woodbush hunting or playing a game or something that was distracting it, which obviously meant that it didn't notice this family until the last minute, rather than have some sort of aggressive encounter. It sort of, I don't know, caught itself on, and then was a bit obviously perturbed rather than angry.
They said to Aidan that it ran off at lightning speed, and when it did, it was almost like it wasn't even touching the ground. It was going that quick and smooth as well. So as if it almost probably knew where every stick on the ground was laying,
Well, it falls into a lot of encounters. A lot of people have described globally, not just in Ireland, when they are encountering Bigfoot type creatures, they're fast. They can be temperamental. They understand the terrain. Brilliant description, 7 foot, well built. Rather than get involved with the family, It started off at pace, which if you go through the Bigfoot map, a lot of people have described almost very similar. And if you look at some of the drone footage on YouTube and some of the Bigfoot channels, that's the sort of speed that they can go with when they're captured, when they're viewed right over the terrain without bothering them one iota at super quick pace.
I got like a side of the eye view maybe 2 or 3 years back of something brown on about 8 foot tall running just at the side of my eye. I didn't get a clear view of it because it was that quick, just like the witnesses describe. But I didn't get a direct view on it, but from the side of my eye, it was light and fast, and there was no noise.
I'm sure a lot of people have had these encounters, and it's just underreported due to people not having an understanding of what they've seen. It's been that quick. They've probably misconstrued it as a deer or another forest animal, when it's been effectively the wood moose they've encountered in the forest or in the mountain ranges. And they just don't know how to explain it, or they're uncomfortable explaining it, so they've just kept it to themselves. Because if everybody does have an understanding of what is happening in the forest, but a lot of people aren't publicizing their encounters. But that's a brilliant one. They're a family running into a juvenile wood moose and it darting off. It's a brilliant description. Unfortunately, no footage on that one.
No, unfortunately not. I think maybe
it was... you're not carrying your camera. No, and when you are carrying your camera, they can see you. Do you know what I mean? That's good because you are inquisitive and they back off. But they're two brilliant encounters that you've described.
Although I think in that situation there too, it's a last minute thing, and I think the people weren't expecting as much as what the Bigfoot wasn't expecting, so you wouldn't even have a chance to get your phone out,
And it's away lightning speed.
Yeah, lightning speed. They said it down the line of trees, like you had, like there was no tomorrow,
Ones where you've got the police force in the States describing Bigfoot encounters, and they've just jumped over the highway one go. Just wow, do you know what I mean? It's just that quick, do you know what I mean? That fast. And it's definitely not a human, so there's no misinterpretation there. And I don't think there's any misinterpretation with this. This is definitely the Irish wood moose they've encountered. One of the clan who's wandered away and who's trying to get back to them as quickly as possible to either inform them that there's people in the area or safety in numbers.
Well, obviously the knock was for that. The first thing I'd done was sort of grunted and looked at them and shook the head and knocked the tree. Now I don't know about knocked the tree once or twice or what happened, but that was the first thing I'd done. So obviously that was a warning to the rest of the group. The people here, and I have seen them.
Yes, it's definitely a signal. I've heard knocks in the Mournes and in Castlewellan.
Just on the subject of knocks, Aidan, is there any? Well, I'll tell you my theory first of all on the knocks, and I have actually tested this out quite a few times. I believe when the knock, let's say the knock once, right? That is simply to warn the others that there's one person there, and that has happened to me loads of times. And you see, anytime I have somebody else with me, let's say I have there's a second person with me, we get 2 knocks. If I have 2 people with me, we get 3 knocks, and so on. And if I revert back to myself, it's 1. So I definitely think it's a form of communication to say, listen, there's 1 person here, there's 2 persons here, or whatever.
It's definitely a form of signaling communication that there's other people in the area. Whether or not it's giving the numbers, I'm unsure. If you're encountering it and that's the pattern that it is following, more than likely then it is accurate. A lot of people describe it in different ways. A signaling system say that I've seen the bird, there's a Bigfoot in the area and his knock's meant to be the loudest. It's meant to inform other Bigfoots that he's in the area, not that other people are in the area, and that it's meant to be a way of communicating so that they can understand where each other are rather than people are. Because if I'm say on the Mournes and you do hear a knock, it's a far distance away, and then
Yeah.
hear another one from another, say, part of the Mourns. You know, I feel that it's them two communicating. Yours could be a signaling system for people in the area. Yeah.
Mm.
If it's a watcher that you've encountered, or they're watching you.
Yeah. Well, one of those examples of that was actually, I'm not sure where people listening have seen Walking with the Wild Man, but I described it in one of the sections in it. Like it's the second area we went to. I was talking to Jim about it. That
Right.
I was down in the Fuse Forest, and that happened. I got one knock, and then I heard another knock from a different angle, a different direction, and then a third one set from a different direction again, and then a fourth from a different direction once again. So they were actually, one right. There's one person here, the other one saying right. There's one person here, and so on. So they were reverting that across the area. That there was one person there.
Yeah, I understand the signaling system that they're using. Incredibly interesting. It's great to hear. Do you know what I mean? It's I've got some recordings of knocks in the area as well. So sometimes it can be other squatchers.
Oh, that's the thing. Yep. That's often passed through my head. Am I knocking to another squatcher?
I know. I've done
But
that a few times myself.
There's one. The last case that I had there with knocks was about a month ago. I think we posted on our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And I was thinking that at the start, but my mind changed whenever eventually there was a knock about 30 feet from me.
Oh no, that's not another squatcher. That's a squatch.
Do you know what I mean? So I started off at a distance, and I kept knocking. They actually kept knocking more, and to see whenever I left the area, they were still knocking.
Brilliant.
So as if to say, come on, play with us. You know what I mean? Let's gotta go, guys. You gotta go to work. You gotta go to work.
So cool. That's
but they really kept at it, and they come up to about 30 feet from me, and they kept banging the tree, bang, bang.
Have you gifted anything to them up around your way, or have you had any gifts given to you yet?
And I've had a few things, in the past. I've tried stuff, but they haven't taken it.
Okay.
But I got a toothbrush.
Oh, brilliant.
From them. Don't know what they were trying to say with that. And one of the cases was actually a knocking stick. So they left a knocking stick for me.
That's not bad.
And I knocked with it, obviously. And as soon as I knocked, I got knocks on all back and on calls on all back once I used it. And I actually brought it up to where I thought that they hang out, right? And I left it on like a wee Y stick, a wee stick with in the shape of a Y. I left it on top of it, and I headed on back down the trail and back to the car and went home as you do, and came back the next day, and the stick was brought back to where they left it.
That's fantastic. That's brilliant.
So, in other words, keep knocking, Chris. We want to knock.
Yeah, definitely. Do you know what I mean? They want you back in the area. They're happy that you're there. Do you know what I mean? If they didn't want you, the stick would have been broken.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But they're definitely looking at communication.
But us on a more happier note, Aidan, unfortunately, we're up. Our time's up.
Oh, no way, man.
Once again. But I'm sure, like we said at the start, there's a lot of talk to do, and I'm sure you'll come back on again sometime for us anyway. So
anytime at all, Chris. Anytime at all.
Of course, I have one more show to do after this one, guys, and I think Jim and Ron's gonna take on a few shows. I'm quite busy with work now the next few weeks, but there'll always be somebody there. Maybe even yourself, Aidan, will take up the ropes and
no problem, yeah,
and be the host at some stage. But I mean, you can chat with that with Jim and Ron anyway. So everybody's looking after that.
The host, I won't stop talking. I won't give him a chance.
Yeah, well, maybe talk Bigfoot will not be an hour long; it'll be 3 hours long. But guys, thanks very much for.
Great to speak to you again.
And you, Aidan, and guys, thanks very much for joining us tonight. And of course, we'll look forward to Aidan returning at some point over the autumn, and hopefully, I'll get back over the autumn too myself for a few chats.
we could do a global encounters. I've had some encounters with family in the Blue Mountains in Australia, and my brother, he went up to the Himalayas before, so I'd definitely love to discuss that at some point.
Cool. Well, Aidan, thank you once again, brother, for coming on. And
excellent, Chris. Loved it.
Look after yourself, and thank you everybody for listening. And we can all look forward to the next episode of Talk Bigfoot. And thank you once again, everybody. Thank you, and good night.